the third annual Juneteenth celebration here in the town of Westford. I would like to say not only thank you to you for showing up on this beautiful night, but also a great thanks to the Westford Historical Society and Museum, and as well as the Mass Humanities for their grant. If they were not able to sponsor this event, then we wouldn't have been meeting tonight. So please show us a round of applause for both Linda and the Mass Humanities Society. We have a long evening planned with all of your participation tonight, but before we go ahead, I just want to take a moment and thank this land that we stand on with our formal land acknowledgement. The Westford DEI Committee gratefully acknowledges the Mi'kmaq nations on whose ancestral homelands we gather today. We acknowledge these indigenous peoples past, present, and future, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people that stewarded it throughout the generations. The efforts from the DEI Committee has been consistent in the past 3 years, along with the partnership again with the Westford Historical Society and special efforts from Linda Green. Linda shared the special dogs that has been the part of the Westford history and the slavery 3 years ago when we started to celebrate this event. That was our first ever Juneteenth celebration. The second event was last year with Dr. Forant, where he educated us about global mills and the history associated with the Juneteenth. It was a very informative session that we had, and then we asked for more. He was able to educate us a little bit more through his podcast that you can listen to on the DEI page on the town website. And as I was learning quite a bit, I felt so much associated with all the learnings and the US history. I was born in India, and unfortunately, I did not learn US history and the slavery. But I was well aware that there were a lot of similarities of what happened in this nation and also what occurred centuries ago in India as well. So it felt me so connected to what I was learning. That being said, I am very excited to be part of this event tonight and just learn more along with all of you here tonight. And in this session of learning and educational event, I'm going to invite Linda Green, who is the director of Westford Historical Society, and she has been devoted countless hours to make this event tonight possible. She has planned it out with all the volunteers. I just want to say thank you, Linda, and I welcome you on the stage.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. My name is Linda Green. I am the director of the Westford Museum and Historical Society. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for Many Voices, One Freedom, a public reading and discussion of Frederick Douglass's 1854-52 speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. This event is presented by the Westford Historical Society and Museum in partnership with the Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Committee with the support of Mass Humanities through its Reading Frederick Douglass Together grant program. On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass presented his powerful speech. In this speech, he underscored the stark contradictions between American professed ideals of liberty and the grim reality of slavery. Douglass urged his audience to confront the exploitations of violence and suffering faced by enslaved individuals in the United States. The history of slavery in Westford may come to a surprise to many of us. Records from the First Parish Church and the town of Westford archives indicate that at least 24 enslaved individuals resided in Westford between 1730 and 1780. While historical information about their lives is very limited, Leslie Howard, our local author of Once Known Slavery in Westford, has worked diligently to collect the records that illuminate their lives and their stories. In Massachusetts, slavery was effectively abolished through court decisions between 1781 and 1783, following the adoption of the Massachusetts State Constitution in 1780. Nationwide, slavery ultimately ended after the Civil War, during which the United States government defeated a group of rebelling states, slave states that sought to break away from the Union. During this turbulent time, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in these rebelling territories. Juneteenth has become a federal holiday in 2021, marking that in June 19, 1865, when Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to inform the enslaved people there of their liberation, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Since 2009, Frederick Douglass' inspiring speech has been read on Boston Common, marking this significant moment in history. And this event has grown to a cherished civic tradition throughout Massachusetts. In 2025, over 8,000 enthusiastic children and adults gathered in 71 public readings across Massachusetts community, celebrating Douglas's powerful message and emphasizing the call for liberty to be applied equally to all Americans. Frederick Douglass was an American social reformer, an abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. He was the most important leader of the 19th century African-American civil rights movement. Westford, take pride in joining this statewide dialogue, bringing renewed attention to Douglas's enduring call for justice, reflection, and civil responsibility. Douglas once observed, freedom is a road seldom traveled by the multitudes. His words continue to inspire as communities nationwide unite to honor Juneteenth. Thank you. At this time, I'd actually like to invite Wendy up to introduce our keynote speaker. And Wendy is the co-chairperson of the Westford Diversity and Inclusion, Westford Equity and Inclusion Committee. She is the chair of the Commission of Disabilities and a member of the Open Space and Recreation Planning Committee. And just this week, she was nominated by Jim Acero for the Massachusetts LGBTQ Legislative Caucus Inaugurational 2026 Commonwealth Pride Award.
Thank you, Linda. Just a slight correction. I am the vice chair of the DEI. I do want to give a shout out to Joe Diamond, who is the co-chair with Anjali, who is, his flight got adjusted. He was supposed to be here, and he sadly can't make it and was disappointed. But we'll have the wonderful recording, and he'll be able to enjoy it. And thank you, Joe, for all the work you do towards this. So it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, who's become a valued friend and guide since we met him a couple of years ago for our previous Juneteenth work. This is his second year helping us illuminate parts of our history that many of us simply weren't taught in school. Through his scholarship and passion for labor and social history, and he has a gift for making the past come alive. He reminds us history is not something fixed in textbooks. As was mentioned earlier on the Common by Noel, thank you, I'm blanking. It is something we continually uncover, examine, and work towards together. Dr. Ferrant is a distinguished university professor at UMass Lowell, teaching generations of students, conducting work that helps the wider community in exploring Lowell's abolitionist past and the broader struggles for justice and equality that have helped countless communities better understand the connections between history and the present day. Together we gather in this remarkable building, first constructed in 1725, now more than 300 years old, to read the extraordinary words of Frederick Douglass that were delivered in 1852. And Dr. Ferrant will help place the speech in its historical context and guide us in considering why a speech delivered in 1852 continues to challenge, inspire, and speak to us more than 170 years later. Please welcome me, help me welcome Dr. Robert Ferrant.
Good evening. I always wonder when I'm speaking in a church what might happen. Because while I was a regular attendee from 0 to 18, it's been sporadic ever since. Good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just coming clean up here in front of all you strangers. I gave a talk several years ago at the Old North Church. If any of you have ever been in there, and it has this very high pulpit, you have to walk upstairs. And I kind of labored up the stairs, and I thought, okay, I'm going to just fall backwards, and that'll be the end of me. It'll be a fitting retribution. That didn't happen, so I'm happy to be here, and I actually love speaking in places like this for the history that they contain. Frederick Douglass is, to me, the most important person we can study in U.S. history, and probably in global history, for his life and the exemplary way that he lived it, the circumstances that he battled with to become the person that he became, and to become, in many respects, the conscience of the country. He lived almost the entirety of the 19th century. He was born in 1808 and he lived until 1895. So he saw a lot of history along the way, obviously. Douglass was born into slavery. He was separated from his mother when he was 10 years old and never saw her again, which was a fairly typical circumstance on a plantation in the southern part of the United States. I should say at the outset, if we think of the founding, if we think of when the first settlers came on the shores of what's now the U.S. in 1609, to when the institution of slavery was made unconstitutional. We've been a country with slavery more than a country with not. I just sat there over there because there was a nice little pencil, and I did the math just to make sure I wasn't making this up. 256 years if we go from 1609 to 1865. And it's shorter than that to go from 1865 till today. So again, something worth thinking about as we ponder Douglass today. Douglass felt passionately about democracy, and he didn't use these words, but he basically thought of democracy as not a passive activity. Democracy was a sport, and you had to get in it and play it and fight it understand the rules of the game, and you couldn't sit on the sideline if you actually wanted to make any kind of change. And again, he lived his life in that exemplary way. So he gives this speech in 1852 in Rochester, New York. He escapes the institution of slavery in the 1830s. He hides away on a railroad train. And he spends 24 hours hidden on a train and makes his way to New York City. He ends up coming to Massachusetts, and he lives in Lynn, Massachusetts, not too far from here. And he also lives in New Bedford, Massachusetts, for a time before he ends up moving to Rochester, New York. He does not know how to read. It's criminal to actually teach an enslaved person how to read. If you were caught teaching an enslaved person how to read, you could be executed. Knowledge was power. The bookmark that was distributed earlier has a quote from Douglass about the importance of knowledge. And he felt this deeply. He actually taught himself how to read at age 10 in church, which kind of cool. Hymnals, and watching people singing and reading the words in hymn books, and he basically taught himself how to read. At age 15, he was actually teaching adults how to read. And basically conducting reading groups before he basically spirited himself away out of the South. And it's interesting, again, in his life, because he lives such a full life on the printed page. In the 1840s, he begins to edit his own newspaper called the North Star, which is sold all over New England, all over the eastern seaboard. He edits that paper himself, writes, edits it, gets other people to write for it, sells subscriptions, jack of all trades in the production of this newspaper, the North Star. He also, over the course of his life, writes 3 autobiographies. He has such a rich life that 3 times he has to stop and write it down. And so he writes one in the 1840s, which sort of looks at his life as a young person to his escape. He writes another one that sort of looks at the period from the 1840s to around 1860. Then in 1875, he writes a third one. If you're of a mind to read them all together, you really get an incredible sort of sense of the day-to-day, and probably one of the best places to look for some conversation about the institution of slavery and what that was like, and again, his sort of pathway out. There's actually a really great biography that was just done by a Yale historian, if anybody wants to tackle a big book. David Blight is a historian at Yale who's written probably the definitive biography of Frederick Douglass, which came out about 3 years ago. So the speech itself, a little bit more, because I know we came to not hear me, but to listen to the reading. Douglass is troubled by the fact that the institution of slavery is not going away. Some people are of a mind in America in the late 1840s, early 1850s, that slavery is basically going to sort of work itself out and go away. The numbers suggest otherwise. The numbers of people enslaved are growing. The territory in the country where slave labor takes place is growing. There's a raging debate in the United States about whether slavery will be spread to new states as they come into the Union. And there's a real serious political debate because in the North, where people are trying to end the institution, each time another state comes into the Union, that's a southern state, that's a state that has the institution of slavery in it, then that's more representation in the House, more representation in the Senate. And what that has done by 1850, and what troubles Douglass immensely, is it's led to passage of something called the Fugitive Slave Law, which becomes the law of the land in 1850. And the importance of it is central, I think, to the way the country over the next 7 to 8 years moves in the direction of what will become the Civil War. The Fugitive Slave Law is a reaction to the fact that black people are escaping slavery, resisting slavery, rebelling forcefully on the plantations where their labor is being exploited. And the system is, to some degree, being weakened by this protest. Abolitionists in the North are lending a hand by supporting the Underground Railroad and other things that, to help sort of speed that process along. But the lead is being taken by enslaved people themselves, by people who are going to become fugitives to the institution of slavery. So the fugitive slave law is going to compel any of us who were alive in 1850 that if we knew somebody living in our midst, like Douglas, who was an escapee, it was our federal responsibility with passage of the fugitive slave law to turn them in. Call a court, call a judge, call a sheriff, turn them in, have them be gone. This is what the fugitive slave law required. And if you fail to do so, and it could be proven that you knowingly harbored a fugitive, you could go to jail for between 5 and 10 years and or be fined a considerable amount of money. So what the fugitive slave law did is essentially make all of us, if we were in this church in 1851, 1852, and made us all have to decide, what are you going to do? What you going to do? When the slave catcher shows up out there, and there are a few people in your parish that might be in that circumstance, they're on their way maybe to Canada, but they're here for a while. And then they're going to move along, which is the case that happens around here a lot. What are you going to do? And so Douglas is essentially in this speech raising the issue and saying, in a very interesting way, when you listen to the way this is structured, it's really like a three-parter. The first few passages are incredibly laudatory about Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. What a wonderful collection of people they were. What a great group of guys. Got to hand it to them. Got to hand it to them. They made that revolution. They beat the British. Got to give them their due. Then in the middle, he says, but now you're doing this crazy stuff. Now you're going back on all the words that you put in those flowery documents in the beginning. Reread your documents, people, he's saying, in the middle of the speech. And get your act together, because you're defiling everything that you're supposed to stand for. And then at the end, he basically softens it again and sort of says, okay, here's some stuff we can do together. We can get through this if we cooperate, if we collaborate, if we figure out what it is that we're doing. And so he is, the speech holds up because it's a masterpiece of sort of pulling people along through this history. He says several years later that he worked harder on this speech than anything else he ever wrote in his entire life. And he got the invitation to give this speech in the Corinthian Hall in Rochester by the Women's Anti-Slavery Society in Rochester. And he got the invitation from the Women's Anti-Slavery Society because, along with being opposed to the institution of slavery, Douglas also took strong positions in favor of women in politics and women's suffrage. And when he would travel the country and go to anti-slavery conventions, most times women would be put in the balcony and separated from the men at anti-slavery conventions, be they in Boston or Lowell or wherever they might be. And when Douglas would arrive at an event like that and see women in the balcony, he would go sit in the balcony. He would say, what are we doing? This is stupid. What is it? How are we thinking this is all going to work if we're doing this in such a way? So he is giving this speech. He's like, today my students talk about, when they talk about this stuff, they have a word called intersectionality, like issues that connect one to the other and whatever. Well, Douglas was doing intersectionality before academics came up with a crazy word. He understood how these things interconnected. You can't do one without leveraging and pushing on and trying to do something with the other. The other thing, and then I will finish up, it's done on July 5, 1852 for a reason. They don't, the black community in the North is not celebrating the 4th of July. It's intentional. It's not like, well, maybe the 4th of July that year was on a Sunday, so they did it on a Monday, just so they didn't compete with church. No, it was intentional. To again, sort of draw this line and say, as Douglas says, what is it that we're doing? So again, the fugitive slave law is the trigger here that really gets Douglas thinking, how do I communicate to the general public in a stronger way? He's taking a chance. He's a fugitive. He's one of the people the law is supposed to have somebody get. Slave catchers come to Lowell. I've done this research. There are a number of people living in Lowell who are fugitives, who are freedom seekers, who operate barbershops, hairdressers, carpentry shops, all sorts of things in Lowell. And people show up looking, and nobody's taken from the city of Lowell. But in other parts of New England, people are taken. Several hundred people end up being taken off the street, and they have no due process. If somebody from the South comes and says, yes, you, and points you out, that's enough. There's no like going to a judge and having a hearing and anything like that. You're gone. There are several famous cases in Boston where people have marched through the streets of Boston in chains with federal troops, taking them to the port and putting them on a ship. The most famous one being Anthony Burns, if anybody wants to do any more research on this. And so lots of people are at great risk, and Douglas is essentially talking about this. Douglas is nearly taken once before 1852. He's traveling in Indiana, and he's mobbed. People know who he is, they know he's coming, they're waiting for him, they grab him, and he and the people with him fight back. Douglas ends up with a broken arm and gets away. So he understands the gravity of the situation. And when he's giving this speech, this is what he's thinking about, right? So for people, when you're reading it, you have to read it with vigor, right? Douglas is not shy as he's telling people, like, what are we doing? Thank you.
Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I'm to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable. And the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I'm here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude.
This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life. and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon. Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government. England is your fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed, in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children, such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn, yet they persevered.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regarded. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it. On the 2nd of July, 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it. Resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your father made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom is gained, yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So, indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men,
I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that that is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for this country is a man whom it is not human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor in the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests. They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission, to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all of their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Mark them, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid their cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of joyous enthusiasm. The causes which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown have never lacked for a time. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and are as familiar to you as household words. They form the staple of your national poetry and eloquence. I leave, therefore, the great deeds of your fathers to others.
My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and His cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers, unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us?
Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, independence, bequeathed by your fathers, is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today?
Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the Jubilee shouts that reached them. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking. It would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view, standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly blinds herself to be false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce, with all the emphasis I can command, everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not at heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear some of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidden. Under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man. Is it not astonishing that, while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? We have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation, as matter is set with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What, am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with a lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued is that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctrines of divinity are mistaken. There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened, the conscience of the nation must be roused, the propriety of the nation must be startled, the hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts side by side of the everyday practices of this nation. And you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now, as the price of men was never higher, and which is carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy. This trade is one of the peculiarities of American institutions. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. The foreign slave trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhumane traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill. Mark the sad procession as it moves warily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of her babe, of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13 weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The droves moves tardily. He and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank, and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on.
Follow this drove to New Orleans. Attend the auctions. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever. And never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, can you witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking? Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States. I was born amidst its sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible reality. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them chained to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number has been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they're usually driven in the darkness of night. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I've been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps, and piteous cries of the chain gangs that pass our door.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight. But a still more inhuman, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be preserved. By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but now is an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner in American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun, by that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees. The liberty and the person of every man are put in peril. Your broad republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have recommended all good citizens to engage in this hellacious sport. Your president, your Secretary of State enforced as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God. That you do the excellent thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have within the past 2 years have hunted down and within a moment mourned, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and torture. Some of these have wives and children depending on them for bread. But of this, no account was made. The right of the hunters to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in the republic, the right of God included.
For black man, there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he co-signs to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black men into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witness for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowded heads tyrants of Russia and Austria, and you pride yourself on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves are consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina.
You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land, you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation. A system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty.
You shed tears over fallen Hungary and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regard to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but are as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America.
You discourse eloquently in the dignity of labor as you sustain a system which in its very essence casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw out the 3-penny tax on tea, and yet bring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in bondage, which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country. Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a bywords to a mocking earth.
It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride, it breeds insolence, it promotes vice, it shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it, and yet you cling to it as it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Be warned, a horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom, the venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever. But it is answered in reply to all this that precisely what I have now denounced is, in fact, guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States. That the right to hold and to hunt slaves is a part of that Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your fathers, instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it, there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least so I believe. And others have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I, therefore, leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference.
The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say and invite you all now to join with me with the words printed in your program. God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime he understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come, all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe.
As we move from the words of Frederick Douglass into our community reflection, we invite you to pause and simply sit for a moment with what you have heard. Douglass spoke from a particular moment in American history when the human longing for freedom, dignity, hope, and belonging is universal. Across cultures and across generations, people have used music to express what words alone cannot fully capture. I'm grateful to have with us this evening a Youth Toastmaster student of mine, Madrika Sivakumar. She is one of our most decorated Youth Toastmasters, having completed at least 17 semesters, if not more, of our program. She's also a talented young musician and vocalist who studies the ancient tradition of Indian Carnatic music to connect her to one of the world's oldest living classical musical traditions. Rooted in centuries of storytelling, devotion, and human expression, Carnatic music offers space for reflection beyond words. As Madrika shares this musical meditation, we invite you to consider how the themes you have encountered tonight resonate across cultures, across generations, and within our own lives. Please welcome Madrika Sivakumar.
Hello everyone, the song that I'll be singing is called Jagadorda. Jagadolai
यशोदा जगदोदारनाथ अधिसिदल यशोदा जगदोदारनाथ अधिसिदल यशोदा जगदोदारनाथ अधिसिदल यशोदा ಮಗನಿಂದು ತಿಳಿಯುತ್ತ ಜಗದೋದ್ಧಾರನ ಮಗನಿಂದು ತಿಳಿಯುತ್ತ ಜಗದೋದ್ಧಾರನ ಮಗನಿಂದು ತಿಳಿಯುತ್ತ ಸುಗುಣಾದರಂಗನ ಅದಿಸಿದಲಿ ಯಶೋದ ಸುಗುಣಾದರಂಗನ ಅದಿಸಿದಲಿ ಯಶೋದ ಜಗದೋದಾರನ ಆದಿಸಿದಲಿ ಯಶೋದ ನಿಜವಾಗಿ ಸಿಲುಕದ ಗಣಿತ ಮಹಿಮಾ ನಿಜವಾಗಿ ಸಿಲುಕದ ಗಣಿತ ಮಹಿಮನ ಮಗುಗಳ ಮಾಣಿಕ್ಯನ ಹರಿಸಿದಲಿ ಯಶೋದ ಮಗುಗಳ ಮಾಣಿಕ್ಯನ ಹರಿಸಿದಲಿ ಯಶೋದ ಜಗದೋದಾರನ ಆದಿಸಿದಲಿ ಯಶೋದ ಜಗದೋದಾರನ
Thank you. I'm always so amazed by the youth in our community and their talents, and that blew me away, Manrika. Thank you for that gift. So now I'd like to welcome up back Dr. Robert Ferrant with some ending context to the speech that we heard. Please welcome Bob back.
Thank you. Everybody should give themselves a hand again for reading. That was really brilliant, truly. Now, I think you got the gist of what I was saying, that Douglas giveth and taketh away. He's not a happy person at the end of the last few readers are getting the part where he's sort of laying it at the feet of the country. A couple interesting things to note, right? Because we're in our 250th, right? And there's all sorts of consternation about what are we doing, and like how are we commemorating 250 years from the Declaration of Independence. So 1876, Douglas is obviously still on the planet. 1876 is the 100th anniversary, and there's this huge fair exposition in Philadelphia, lamely titled the Philadelphia Exposition. And Douglass shows up to go into the opening of the exhibit, and they don't want to let him in because he's black. They don't know who he is. The person that won't let him in is white, and it's a segregated celebration of the Declaration of Independence. And finally, cooler heads prevail, and they allow Douglass to enter. But 1876, the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, is also the end of what historians would call Reconstruction. So in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, there's an attempt to try to basically live up to the 14th and 15th Amendments in terms of civil rights, education, political rights, voting rights, everything encompassed in the 14th and 15th Amendments. And in the election of 1876, there was a great deal of trickery. And historians argue about whether the election actually was stolen. It's really quite controversial. And the election is so close that it goes to a commission that gets set up to try to figure out who won, because the Electoral College vote is a mess, and everybody's arguing about what's going to happen. And the Democrat at the time is winning. And the Republican Party goes to the Democratic Party hierarchy, not to the Democratic candidate Tilden, who won, and says, what will it take for you to agree we won? This is straight up history. You can easily check, so there's I get nowhere lying, right? And basically the Democrats say, because the Democratic Party in 1876 is the party of the South. The Republican Party is the party of Lincoln, the party that prosecutes the Civil War, right? The Democratic Party controls all the southern states, the Confederacy. The Democratic Party bigwigs say, if you end Reconstruction, if you pull all the federal troops out of the South that are safeguarding civil rights and voting rights for black people, we'll let you win. And the Republican Party says, cool. And they do it. Thus ends Reconstruction in 1876. So 100th anniversary is the betrayal, if you will, of the 14th and 15th Amendments, and also obviously the 13th Amendment ending the institution of slavery. If we jumpstart 50 more years, 1926 going into effect are the most harsh immigration laws in the history of the country. A quota system is put in place that severely restricts immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and makes immigration from any countries in Asia impossible. And that quota system is going to stay in place until the 1960s. That quota system makes it impossible for Jewish refugees to escape Hitler at the time of World War II. Jewish refugees were trying to get out of Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland. They were on ships coming to the United States. Because of the quota law, the ships are turned around. Franklin Roosevelt, the liberal saint of the Democratic Party, sits in his office and does nothing about it. So we have a checkered history with our anniversary, 100, 150, 200, and now, of course, 1976 is a dismal year. For those of us that are my age, you know, the country looks like it's falling apart. We've had the ending of the Vietnam War, Richard Nixon, the falling apart of the civil rights movement, just a vast repression. Just the country is really seemingly falling apart, and now we have 50 years later, and the 250, we have what we're dealing with. So I think you can read Douglass at any moment in that sequence of 50, 100-year anniversaries, and more or less he's on target. His words are a little different. If he could come back and join us, he would write obviously slightly differently, but he's a incredible user of the social media of the day. The speech, after it's finished, my last point, goes into print. He prints it in his newspaper, the North Star. William Lloyd Garrison prints it in his newspaper, The Liberator. And so it's read by hundreds of thousands of people who get that newspaper every week. And it's also printed up in book form. And thousands of copies get sold, which is somewhat unheard of at the time. It literally flies off the shelves, if you will. I can imagine if there was an X or whatever, like how much it would have had an impact. But the speech got around. And I shouldn't say that was the last, the very last thing, I'm sorry. The history is important because Douglas is also, in the speech, Douglas is also warning people who say that they're for ending slavery. There's a passage there where he's sort of saying to people, you say, what's the hurry? Somebody over here read it, I can't remember who, but there's a passage where he's sort of saying, you're all saying, what's the hurry? Why am I in a rush? Why am I angry? I should chill. And he's basically saying, yeah, no, that doesn't work. And basically people, his critics, he's saying, are saying to him, you know, you should go slow. And he's saying no, but even within the abolitionist movement in 1852, Douglas is not happy because within the movement there are various segments of the people who claim to be against slavery. There are some people who are immediate abolitionists. That would be Douglas, Garrison, people close to them. There are another collection of people called gradualists. And a lot of them are clergy, and they're worried about the violence that might come from immediate abolitionism, from revolts and things like that. And so there, we just have to take our time. We'll eventually get there. There are people in favor of colonization, that everybody should be freed, but they should basically be put on ships and sent back. It's why there's a country in Africa named Liberia, and the capital of it is Monroviaville, after a president of the United States, James Monroe. There's also a group of people, and think of this is my last point, I promise. There's also a group of people that basically say, here's how we can do this. We will pick a date in the future, and everyone born after that date will be free. But everybody born before that date will be enslaved until they die. So let's say hypothetically we took April 1, 1870 as the date that somehow we all agreed on. What that would mean was if you were born on April 2, you were free. If you were born on March 31, 31 days in March, right? You were not, which meant you could live well into the 20th. The argument was to set up a system where well into the 20th century could have millions of people enslaved by law. If that argument had won the day before the actual fighting and everything that we know of as the Civil War. So imagine that's a conversation people are having. Well, we can just pick a date, and everybody before that date stays enslaved, everybody born after that is free. That's the volatility of the debate that Douglas is interjecting the speech into. Thank you.
Before we started the reading of the speech, and now after the fact, how many of you really feel that you are more educated about this whole June 19 celebrations and what it really stands for? Yeah, that includes me as well. Learned so much, and I could totally see the passion in each one of you when you're reading. So thank you for participating. It was amazing, and everyone brought their own passion and a little bit of own twist on the speech as well. So that was great. I'm going to now welcome Sadia Ahmed, who is basically a community member. She does conflict resolution. Sadia, I'm having a hard time reading with my glasses. The light is not really quite good enough for me. So what I can talk about you is you are a conflict resolution professional, educator, and a community leader. And you work on the centers on building understanding and belonging within the diverse communities.
You have done your master's degree in conflict resolution from University of UMass Boston, and you have spent a lot of time on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. You have encouraged people to seek common grounds and to approach difficult conversations with empathy and grace. That's the most difficult task. Empathy and grace and conflict resolution. I'm an HR professional and I deal with conflicts all the time. People can deal with machines easy. You can learn new machines, new languages very easy. But dealing with people and resolving the conflicts is the most difficult task in the world. So please welcome Sadia Ahmed, and she's gonna be Sadia will help us in facilitating the reflection of what we just learned tonight.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I think for myself personally as well, just showing up in these community spaces I think is so meaningful, especially now. Certainly for myself, gives me a lot of hope, and I hope it does for you as well. So we'll now be moving into the discussion portion of the event tonight. Obviously we've heard a lot, you know, there's a lot of different ideas and feelings that come through with the speech, and just want to thank again the live readers. I think for me this is actually the first time I've heard the live reading, and truly just brings it alive in a different way. So if you turn to, hopefully everyone has the program guide. If you go to the second page when you open the booklet, you'll see here we have a few ground rules and a few questions. So just want to quickly go through the ground rules for people. So kind of basics, everything I think people have heard already, kind of listening to understand, sharing openly while being mindful of others, sharing the mic, making sure that each person has the chance to share, making this what I call both a safe space where people feel comfortable sharing, and also a brave space where I think especially for people who might not feel comfortable sharing, really encouraging you all to speak and share as you feel able to do so. Leaning into discomfort, I think the speech does a good job of what that means and can look like. And then finally leaving room for silence as needed, just recognizing people process in a lot of different ways. If anyone has just, again, very open, general, yeah, please. If you feel comfortable just sharing maybe your name, maybe your role in the community, how long you've been here, so folks can get to know each other a little bit.
Hi, I'm Lisa Asama, and I've lived in Westford since the 90s. I'm on the Historical Society, and yeah, it's voting. So what stood out to me was actually in the passage that I read about how, I guess at the time, the country was enraged about what was going on in Hungary and Ireland and France, and not addressing the problems that we have here at home. And I feel like we still do that. We look at other countries and we point the finger, and I sometimes sit back and think, yeah, but we're no better and we're not trying to do anything here. So instead of pointing the fingers at them, why aren't we fixing what's here?
Just a quick response, I think it's much more difficult, right? I think we can all, myself included, can look at external people or situations and be like, I would have done this, this, and this, but then if we look at the mirror, what do we see and what do we do about that? I think is a very universal thing. I saw another hand, was it you?
Hi, I'm Jody Holloway. I live here in Westford. I was struck by the real specifics in Frederick Douglass's speech. He says families are being ripped apart and people are being whipped and they're bleeding and their teeth are getting knocked out. This is not, you know, dignity and slavery and general words like that. This is like children being ripped apart from parents, and it's very, very specific, and it makes you cannot look away. You cannot pretend that it's okay.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think, you know, reflecting on today's times as well, I think, right, there's a lot of, unfortunately, similarities, some differences, but certainly a speech that's relevant for today as well. So thank you for sharing it.
Hi, my name is Rob Michael. I've been in Westford. My wife, Nicole, for 26 years. What struck me, I'm familiar with Frederick Douglass, having read his biography, at least most of it anyway. And so the speech wasn't new to me, but it was still quite powerful. What struck me, of course, is the parallels to today, even though they're less intense, perhaps, as you just described, but they're still present. And as Martin Luther King stated, the arc of justice bends towards, I'm going to butcher it, but it bends in the right direction, but it's slow. And with that thought, I ask everyone, do what you can, whatever that might be, to move us along that arc.
Absolutely. I think community involvement, local community involvement, I think is sometimes under-exercised and underutilized. I think that's a really great way to go about it.
John Moses, I'm actually from Chelmsford. I do a lot of work with 50-51 veterans and the No Kings protests and things like that. I think the point that I got out of that was there's a real the loss of compassion on people that right now in our country, we're removing people, we're entering people's homes without warrants. There's no justice if you're an immigrant. There's no courts, and those are the same issues. I was especially struck by there are 72 laws that apply to black people, but not only 2 for a death penalty for white people. And kind of what I've seen in our communities now is a certain amount of, for the other side of the argument, for the people that believe immigrants should be removed from the country, is an uncomfortable amount of joy for their suffering. And you know, there was some other words I heard in there, and I don't remember the third one, but it said something along the lines of avarice with your pride, and it was the third one I can't remember. But thinking about how proud people are now to be anti-immigration, and to hear about those refugee laws that precluded the Jewish people from escaping Germany. A lot of people have this vision of our country as a great idea, and that is true, like Frederick Douglass said. However, that idea, we have not lived up to the ideal of it. So, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Rushi. I'm a junior at Westford Academy, and I'm also part of the Youth Toastmasters program. One thing that kind of stood out to me in Douglas's speech was the way that he frameworked his argument, right? We see a couple passages where Douglas, he almost ridicules the idea that we need to justify that the slave is a man, that we need to justify that slavery is wrong. And I think that argument shift is so powerful because it removes the need to justify these truths, right? Because a lot of what was going on at the time was we had abolitionists saying, well, slavery is wrong. They were trying to argue with these conservatives, with these people that were enslaving people. And by Douglas just shifting that away, saying, no, we're not going to argue this. We don't need to waste our time. We don't need to waste our energy arguing this. These are truths. These are givens. We need to focus on fighting. We need to focus on how we're going to push forward, how we're going to prevent slavery. And I think that is what set Douglas apart as an abolitionist. And we learn a lot of abolitionists in U.S. history in school, but I think that's what made Douglas so powerful, and I think that's what made his argument so powerful.
Hi, my name is Margarita. I'm a junior at Westford Academy as well. And I just want to go back to the point that someone else made earlier about how there are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia that are punishable by death for a black man, but only 2 of them are subjecting a white man to the same punishment. And I think that's something that stands out is just how systemic the act of racism was. And I know we hear the concept of systemic racism everywhere, but it's pretty shocking to see how much the justice system and just the judicial system in the United States was biased and just contaminated from the start. And I just think it's really interesting to see how much that impacts the citizens as well, because when you think of the 4th of July and what it's supposed to symbolize, you really think of this constitutional equality. And I mean, Douglas himself references Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, just really referencing how this is kind of a constitutional right of this liberty and this freedom that we have in this nation. And it's crazy to me, and it really stood out to me how much
the justice system in and of itself is influenced by these biases.
Absolutely. I think we kind of sometimes as a society, even subconsciously, take for granted, oh, if something's a law or something's a holiday, that's automatically right and true and just, but sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And I think questioning that, like you were saying, I think is really important.
This is very unique. I don't even know how to start this, but my name is Moses. I was just passing through and I stopped to talk some business. I got invited here. So this was not my radar today, but I just want to say congratulations to everything that's happening here. This is the best I've ever seen. I mean, if everybody can have conversations like that and have an open mind and learn about history like that, it makes us appreciate each other more often and stuff like that. Well, the reason I raised my hand is this. I'm from West Africa, Ghana. Originally, I'm a US citizen. I've been a US citizen for a very long time. I came to this country very lately, through the right way, never cut in the corners. But I was listening to all the people that gave the speech and everything that happened here tonight. And I went to school in Cape Coast in Ghana, and down the street was a slave castle that I literally drove by this place every day or just walked by. And just to give you a little hint of it, nothing against color. I love everybody. I just want to say this. And it's a very eye-opener, that when you go to the castle, there's a church above the castle, right? And the white man that takes the Bible and prays from the Bible every Sunday is the same white man that goes into the dungeon and picks up a black lady and rapes her every night to survive before they put them on the ship to the point of no return. There's right there, there's a door that says point of no return. If you go through that door, you enter the ship, that means you go. It's either you make it through the seas to the Americas or to the countries that before you get to America and all that stuff that happens. So I feel like I've kind of seen both worlds, I mean, I came to this country not knowing about anything about the history here. With all we did is hear things, And it's a stark contrast, like when you look at what happened, they give a chief a mirror just for a human being. Give a chief a gun just for a human being, just to ship them to go work in cotton farms and stuff. So it's a very eye-opener. So I encourage everybody, my little ad here is I say, take a trip to West Africa. They're very nice people, they're very hospitable, not like what you see on TV and stuff like that. And take a trip to the castles, take a trip around, look at the culture and everything. And it's very beautiful and we learn from each other. But I think I want to congratulate everyone sitting in this room here, listening to this. This really opened my eyes. Like, I could not thank you guys any further than I'm doing now. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, and I think as you were speaking, I was just thinking, a reminder of, unfortunately, the United States is not alone in this, this issue of enslavement, right? Unfortunately, other countries, it looks different and acts different, but unfortunately, we're not alone in this. So I think just having that larger global perspective, I think, is also important as well. So. I'm getting my steps in, so it's okay. Thank you, I appreciate it.
I was struck by it's been raised a little bit, but just bringing it together, the role of, or lack of role of the judicial system in all of this. And the two particular points, one was brought up that there was the lack of due process, and the comparison, of course, comes to mind of the lack of due process given to some of our immigrants today. We're taken off the streets for lack of due process. But there's also this, I was shocked to learn tonight that the judges were paid for their
verdicts. And that is systemic corruption that I just had no idea about, and that our countrymen apparently were complicit in that, because that sounded like it was universal, that our judges could be paid for their outcomes, their verdicts. And I just thought that was pretty horrendous, and I was sad I didn't know it.
Absolutely. Again, that kind of what we were saying before, we think the law is kind of this neutral, just system, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's also vulnerable to things like this. Absolutely.
My name is Pat. I've been in Westford for over 51 years, but I came here as an immigrant child at 12, and I grew up in Cambridge in the 60s, and yes, I was in the protest, but I sometimes feel despair. I've stopped turning on the news because I feel like we've gone so far backward for everything we fought for back then. It's just, I just get that feeling. So the more I read about Frederick Douglass, and I've really gone into it, it's like he's speaking to today. And if we can bring back that passion that some of us had back when, maybe we can fix some of this. I don't know. That's my comment.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I came over from Arlington today. It's kind of interesting because I think a lot of what people have talked about is like sort of, and what Frederick Douglass talked about was really sort of the struggle of like reconciling like these contradictions that are baked into the establishment of this nation. I was kind of reminded of the story of that being able to visit like the ruins of like the slave castles in Ghana. Like I once made a pilgrimage to the other big revolutionary state, Virginia, and I went to Monticello. You know, like the home of like this brilliant visionary Thomas Jefferson. You know, the sort of like titular like what an American founder should be. Beautiful building, and then you round the corner of the hill, and there is the cave where his slaves lived, and the dingy tunnels going into this beautiful house. And it's just so shocking to see like the psychosis of America, like captured like literally like the beating heart of this place. You know, Frederick Douglass talks about there's this venomous reptile like latched onto the country, and like America like rip it off. I think the uncomfortable thing is the venomous reptile isn't something foreign. The venomous reptile is kind of one of the founders of this country. And why we see so much conflict is a lot of people don't want to get rid of that venomous reptile because they kind of see that's part of what America is. But I think we have to figure out how, you know, we can sort of separate ourselves from these bad legacies and can finally start healing from the venom that was brought into us from the founding, from the beginning of the country.
And I think this is where, you know, countries like such as South Africa, where kind of public reconciliation efforts are so important because it kind of names all of this and kind of says, we acknowledge this is part of our history. You know, you think about even, you know, a lot of events now introduced by naming what part of a Native American land we're on, right? It doesn't fix everything, but it does raise that kind of awareness and start to bring about, not perfect justice, but maybe one small piece of justice.
Hi everybody, my name is Zoe. My new last name is Tamara. It's no last name, it's actually my maiden name. But I'm the friend that brought Moses. I live in Lowell, but I do have a business here in Westford that I just opened up not too long ago. It's a staffing company, healthcare staffing, where the works is. That's where I put the tag. Anyway. It's called Rosebud Healthcare Staffing Solutions. So many things were going on through my head as I was listening to this. I've read this speech before. The absolute name, I don't even know, just force of nature, anything that Dr. Forn does, I follow. So I found this, and I missed the one in Lowell for the charter kit, so I had to come here tonight. And I also think it's almost a sign too, because I'm actually an immigrant as well. I was born in Monrovia, Liberia, just mentioned that, which is the West African country in where the American slaves were shipped to after slavery. That's a whole nother topic. In order for the country to be colonized by ex-slaves, and the indigenous people ended up being slaves to the ex-slaves. But there was a civil war 100 years later. Anyway, and then also, we also mentioned April 2nd, that cutoff line, that's actually my birthday. So, I was like, what's going on? We're in the church, so, so maybe I should say something. So 3 things come to mind. Time, talent, and treasure. Time, as I was jotting down notes, and you guys did a phenomenal job. I have never heard this speech, spoken, but read it. It was absolutely magnificent. But time stood out to me because the more things change, the more things stay the same, right? We're looking at and talking or having a conversation about something that happened hundreds of years ago, but it's completely relevant today. The dehumanization of people is the fabric of not just America, but I think of the world. Not understanding that we are all beings rather than we're all different. So, talent. The talent that was struck to me on so many different levels as reading this, and I was listening to his words. The talent of our mind is, to me, absolutely fascinating. And I say this again, the talent of our minds, of how we think, is absolutely fascinating. Why am I saying this? Because as Frederick Douglass was pointing out that people were outraged about what was going on outside of the country and not talking about what was going on within their own backyard, it's happening today as well. But more importantly, when I was the only one in the classroom when I was growing up, we're talking about slavery, and I'm looking at you like, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm from Liberia, but anyway, the ability for our minds to dismiss what's actually happening is absolutely profound. I think that is a uniqueness that we all carry, because we are here, and I'm saying we, meaning not here in this room, we, meaning the entire collective body of human beings. We're here, and so many things are going on. Homelessness, drug addicts, all these, and if it does not affect us, we have a wonderful way of dismissing it. And so that's how I used to be uniquely explain to myself how can this happen for hundreds of years to enslave people? Human beings that look like you, act like you, behave like you, related to you, and you treat them as if they are nothing. How to reconcile that? How we think. It doesn't affect us. And at the lowest common denominator, for those that may not understand what I'm saying, the only sports I watch is basketball. If you tell me what's going on, he was trying to talk to me today about soccer. Clueless. And there's a whole World Cup going on right in our backyard, right? Like people are coming thousands and thousands of miles away to come and see these people kick these balls. We're right here. I'm right here. I could care less. He loves it though, right? Think about it that way. It doesn't affect me. There's homeless people that every single day I walk out of my house and they become as if they're not even there, but they exist. And we're not doing anything about it. That's talent. Finally, treasure. What we value is what we do as humans. Whatever you value in your heart, as a man thinketh, so shall he be. Whatever you value in your heart is what you do. If you're an artist at heart and you love to draw, you're gonna make it happen. If you are Elon Musk and want to be the first trillionaire of the world because you love money, you're gonna make it happen. This whole thing that's happening is about treasure. And what do most of us love? Money. That was all it was about. It has nothing else to do with anything else but wealth. And as we sit here today, and as the wealth divide becomes increasingly more disparaging and larger and just astronomical, we sit there. And then my question that I didn't see on here that kept me nagging at me. What was, I think I know the answer, but I want to ask you, what was the leading text in those days that everyone was reading? Not Frederick Douglass's speech. What was the text that, as an American, you had to read, whether you liked it or not, every single week, whether you liked it or not, had to be at a certain space in a place, whether you liked it or not, and you followed? What was that text? Think about that. It's amazing to me that reading, following, embodying the 10 Commandments, how Jesus lived, how Jesus worked, what he did, how he was being taught every single day. And yet, we were still able to ignore it.
Thank you, and thank you all for kind of sharing what's been standing out. I'm sure there's also a lot more to discuss there, but I do want to end, if a couple of people have a reflection on, I think it's the last question here, just to kind of, take what we've processed and discussed here together. What might acting on this speech look like for you? A couple of people were talking about, I could hear almost like this sense of helplessness with what's going on in our country now. Then a couple other people were talking about kind of the local involvement. So I'm just curious if a few people feel comfortable sharing what might acting like this speech look like for you, even if it's something you haven't done yet. Maybe you can leave here beginning that.
What I mentioned about finding something to do, whatever your talent might be, what I would say for me, what I do, because I don't like the unfairness in the world, but I don't feel my talent would serve well to affect policy or such things. So what I do is I spend time at the Wish Project, at Household Goods, and at the World Food Pantry, volunteering my time.
I think that's an important part is, you're not asked to do something you're uncomfortable with or something you're not quite as skilled in. That's kind of going back to what I was saying, the diversity of the different readers. There is kind of a blessing in having diversity, as you can have multiple approaches to the same problems. Thank you for sharing that. What about for others? What might acting on this speech look like?
For me, it is enabling our youth to use their voices. And my co-youth Toastmaster coordinator, Rich, and I have been running youth Toastmaster classes for about 6 years now. And we just love doing it because the youth just need the space and the tools and amazing speeches that we hear each week. The things that they're thinking about impacts us. They're teaching us each week. We just give them some basic gimmicks and tools, and they're amazing, and they keep our light going. Rich and I can't imagine stopping it because, and you heard the youth here tonight, they're just amazing, the things they talk about, and they can speak about whatever is important to them as long as it's appropriate to the group. And I just love hearing what is important to them. Another thing that I do is, as part of the LGBTQ community, just have visibility in Westford. And I feel like we didn't have that much 3 years ago. I'm working on building that community and trying to have this place feel safer for each of the letters of that LGBTQ, and especially our T folks really feeling a lot of harm right now. I was privileged to go to Boston, and there was so much safety I felt being among folks that were LGBTQ or advocates. I realized I haven't been walking through the world the same way since January of 2024, or just before that. So, thank you.
I think that's an important point. The service kind of goes both ways, right? It's not just transformation on one end. I think really when it's authentic and true, it does go both ways. So, thank you for sharing that. Any others in terms of kind of what might acting on this speech look like for you?
I just wanted to say, I mean, I think it was said beautifully before. I'm sorry if I didn't get your name, but you mentioned earlier that it's so easy for us in today's world to just ignore. And you know, if it doesn't apply to us, it's so easy for us to just kind of pretend it doesn't exist. And I think for me, it's the act of noticing that I think I'm going to try to implement more in my life. It's just going about my day, and you know, it might not directly influence state legislature or anything, but I think going about my day and making that personal choice to care about things that may or may not concern me, or may or may not directly impact me, I think that's really powerful. And I think also just going about spreading that kind of sentiment to other people and enabling other people to also take that moment and actually care and actually notice whether or not it affects them. And I think that can, you know, when enough people start doing that themselves, it starts to have this ripple effect. And, I mean, we see so many things in legislature and politics today that definitely divides our country in so many different ways. And so many people, especially when some particular legislature is made, if it doesn't apply to them or if it doesn't affect them, they often just don't care. Whether that's immigration, and I could go on and on about that. But I think just the act of noticing and encouraging others around you to start noticing as well. I think that was said beautifully earlier, just how easy it is for us in today's society to ignore what doesn't affect us. So I think that's something that I'll consciously try to implement in my life now.
Thank you. And I think that's a great note to end on is, as you were talking, I was thinking, you know, it doesn't have to change the whole country or the whole world to have meaning and impact, right? I think sometimes we feel like we're held to that standard, but really if it's just with your neighbor or a friend or a colleague or a family member or your local community, showing up, honestly, even showing up the way you all did tonight, I think is very powerful. So thank you all for participating in the discussion and for being here. I think I'll pass it back to Wendy to close off the event.
There's so many thank yous to give for tonight's blessing. I'm not a religious person, but I do feel blessed in a secular way, if that's possible. So inspired by meeting our first speaker, Roland Gibson, he had said, what comes next? What do we do next? And that follows along. He inspired us to put together a flyer, Continue the Journey, and they're available at both of the exits on both sides. And just some ideas of things to think about, and this will continue. Linda has already said, what are we doing next year for this? And who will we have as readers? And I think that energy and that commitment is part of what makes our town and our community great. So please continue the journey, and also take a bookmark, take a few bookmarks. The fact that Frederick Douglass could read, that he could teach reading. I have a ton of these bookmarks. I want to give them to the library. I want to have them around town, because once you learn to read, you will forever be free. Be forever free is so important to remember, all of us. None of us are expected to do everything, of course, but we can all do something. And I want to mention that WestfordCAT has been recording this beautiful event. Ryan Cozzens is in the back, and
my name is Damon Abetz.
Damon Abetz. Abetz?
Yes.
Okay. has been doing a great job of covering this. And Sarah Fletcher will have it edited and up for folks to enjoy for generations to come. A big thank you to Abby Tarr, who is doing our A/B support. These are the little things, the little pieces that none of us can do, as we don't have the capacity to do all this. Each one of us has a little piece. And that is also part of the amazing blessing of our community. So, Roland, did you want to end with anything tonight? I just feel like you inspired something in me, and I just feel like I want to hear something from you.
I'm Roland Gibson. I live in Littleton with my wife Joyce. And this is not my first time being with Westford folks. And it's good for me to be in a room with people who are trying to figure out how to solve this problem, really for people of color, but also for women. With this current regime, we're going through a major change in approach to governance. And it's good to be in a room with people that are saying, we can do better than that. Are you with me? Yes. We can do better than that. So I want to commend you for the work that you're doing. Keep doing it. This game is not going to end well the way it's going, but you and I have some control over how it's going to end. Thank you.
He said it. So thank you all, and have a safe journey home tonight. Thank you for, wait. Thank you. Have a great night and safe travels home.
Oh, no, you're good.